Welcome back. Welcome back to Sip&Talk. So glad you could join us.
Yeah, great to be here.
Ready to stir things up and maybe even spill a little tea on some big global topics.
It's absolutely fantastic to connect with all of you, truly, no matter where you're tuning in from around the globe. We love having this chat with you every week.
You know, it's always endlessly fascinating to peek behind the curtain at our back-end data. And something that consistently stands out and honestly warms my tech nerd heart is this. While our Chinese listeners might currently make up a small percentage of our audience, maybe around 2% of our total listenership, they are, without a doubt, disproportionately engaged.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah. They are always sending in these incredibly challenging, truly thought-provoking questions. I mean, they really make us earn our keep. We genuinely appreciate that level of curiosity and intellectual sparring.
They really do keep us on our toes, don't they?
They do.
And you're absolutely right. The questions they pose are often incredibly complex, deeply nuanced, and sometimes even a little bit uncomfortable to unpack.
Yeah.
But that's precisely why we do Sip and Talk.
Yeah.
We're committed to tackling tough topics with all the thoughtfulness and, dare I say, gentle compassion they deserve. Because at the end of the day, when we're discussing geopolitics or historical narratives, we're talking about real people and real lives.
Exactly.
Today, we're diving into one such query about Taiwan. And honestly, it's a fascinating challenge, a true brain teaser that invites us to explore a deeply nuanced situation with that gentle, compassionate lens. It's a bit like untangling a complex knot, one thread at a time.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to unpack a very specific analogy a listener brought up, one that gets thrown around quite a bit in certain circles.
Right.
They essentially asked us to consider if Taiwan independence is like California seceding from the U.S. or Scotland seceding from the U.K. Now, that's a loaded comparison, isn't it?
It really is.
We're going to dissect why this comparison is often made, what its historical and political roots are, and then we're going to really dig into why, from an international perspective, it's problematic and just doesn't hold water. After that, because we always want to offer clearer ways of thinking, we'll try to find some analogies that might offer a better, more honest way to think about Taiwan's situation.
Good idea.
And finally, we'll explore why unification is viewed so starkly differently by mainland China and by Taiwan itself. What are the perceived pros and cons for each side? Our goal, as always, is an objective, research-backed discussion, not taking sides or endorsing any particular viewpoint, but just laying out the facts as we understand them, encouraging you, our listener, to form your own informed opinions.
Okay, let's get into it.
Okay, Joe here, and let's uncork this analogy right off the bat. We're starting with that core idea. Taiwan independence is like California seceding from the U.S. or Scotland seceding from the U.K. Now, my immediate thought when I first heard this comparison was, why would anyone even think these are similar? On the surface, it feels, well, a bit off, doesn't it? Like comparing apples to, I don't know, very confused oranges. What's the logic or perhaps the narrative behind this comparison?
That's a fantastic question, and it really gets to the heart of understanding mainland China's perspective and the deeply ingrained one China principle. The roots of this analogy are profoundly embedded in China's national narrative and the systematic historical education that has been in place for decades, shaping how generations view Taiwan.
So it's fundamentally about what people are taught practically from kindergarten, shaping their worldview before they even get a chance to question it.
Exactly. The education system in mainland China teaches consistently and from childhood, that Taiwan has been an inseparable part of China since ancient times. This isn't just a dry historical factoid. It's woven into a much larger, very emotional national narrative. There's a strong emphasis on a deep-seated sense of national humiliation linked to past territorial losses, particularly during the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Okay.
Think about the cession of Taiwan to Japan in 1895 via the Treaty of Shimonoseki, that harsh agreement which marked a profound defeat for China and began Taiwan's 50-year colonial separation under Japan.
Wow, 50 years.
Yeah. For many, that period is viewed as a profound wound. So for the mainland, unification isn't just about territory. It's a core part of national rejuvenation, a powerful symbol of strength and restoring what they see as past glory and dignity after a century of humiliation.
I see.
This narrative is incredibly ingrained, profoundly influencing public perception and shaping how generations of Chinese citizens view Taiwan. It's a foundational belief.
And it's not just about historical education, is it? There's a powerful legal, or at least a constitutional component to this, too, from mainland China's perspective. It provides a framework for their claims.
Precisely. The Constitution of the People's Republic of China explicitly states that Taiwan is part of its sacred territory. Now, here's the crucial part, and it's a point of significant contention internationally. The PRC has never actually governed Taiwan.
Never.
Not for a single day since its founding in 1949. They've never had administrative or military control over the island.
Oh, yeah.
But from Beijing's viewpoint, this constitutional stance legally frames Taiwan as a local separatist force, not an international sovereignty issue. It's designed to be seen as a domestic matter, akin to a rebellious province, with foreign interference being an unacceptable violation of internal affairs. It's their legal justification for everything they do.
It sounds like this framing offers a certain psychological comfort, then, for many Chinese citizens. If you frame it this way, you don't have to confront the uncomfortable reality of Taiwan being, well, quite distinct and having developed independently. It simplifies a complex geopolitical reality.
That's absolutely right. This comparison of Taiwan to an internal region like California or Scotland serves as a significant psychological comfort for many Chinese citizens. It reduces the anxiety that might arise from Taiwan's de facto independence. The fact that it has its own vibrant government, its own military, conducts its own diplomacy, and essentially functions as an independent entity.
Yeah.
By framing it as a domestic issue, it allows Beijing to justify its ongoing political and military pressure on Taiwan as simply internal affairs that no one else should interfere with. This psychological comfort isn't just internal. It actively blinds Beijing to Taiwan's separate reality, creating an echo chamber that prevents genuine dialogue and ironically fuels the very internationalization of the issue it seeks to avoid.
Interesting. A narrative shield, you mean?
Exactly. A narrative shield, not a pathway to understanding Taiwan's distinct identity.
Here's where it gets really interesting, folks, because while we can understand why the analogy is made, for those who grew up with this narrative, it just doesn't hold up under scrutiny, does it?
Not really, no.
What are the logical cracks, the factual discrepancies in this comparison? It feels like there are quite a few glaring ones even.
You're spot on. It fundamentally unravels when you look at the facts from an international legal and historical perspective. The core difference lies in sovereignty and effective governance.
Okay.
California and Scotland have always been under the undisputed effective governance of their central governments, the United States and the United Kingdom, respectively.
Right.
Their legal and administrative structures are fully integrated into a larger national system. Right. They operate within a defined constitutional framework.
So it's not like California suddenly decided to leave the U.S. last Tuesday, because California has always been an integral part of the U.S. Its entire legal and social history is intertwined with the Union.
Exactly. But Taiwan's reality is starkly different. It has not been under the PRC's rule since the PRC was founded in 1949. The PRC has never, not once, exercised administrative or military control over Taiwan.
Never governed it.
Never. In international law, there's a concept called effective control, which is a key criterion for statehood. Taiwan demonstrably meets the criteria for a de facto sovereign entity. It effectively governs itself and has for decades, entirely separate from Beijing, managing its own borders, economy, and legal system. This isn't a theoretical claim, it's a lived reality on the ground.
And what about the historical trajectories? Because Scotland and England have a pretty clear history of coming together, don't they? A very deliberate act of union.
They certainly do. Scotland formally united with England through the Acts of Union in 1707, a clear legal and historical basis for their current relationship within the United Kingdom.
Right.
It was a negotiated, formal political unification.
Right, a signed deal.
Taiwan's history, however, is unique and incredibly complex, marked by distinct political transitions. As we mentioned, it was formally ceded to Japan in 1895 via the Treaty of Shimonoseki for a significant 50 years.
50 years, yeah.
Then, after World War II in 1945, it was taken over by the nationalist government, the Republic of China, ROC. Not the Communist People's Republic of China. This is crucial. Taiwan never rejoined a communist-ruled China.
Okay, never part of the PRC.
Never signed any merger agreement with the PRC.
Yeah.
This is a profound historical discontinuity that simply doesn't exist for California or Scotland. Taiwan's political development followed a separate path.
So it's not like a region that's always been part of a country suddenly wants to break away. It's a distinct entity with its own very different path, a path carved out through various historical turns.
Precisely. And that leads us directly to Taiwan's international standing and recognition. Taiwan possesses all the real-world attributes of a sovereign entity.
Like what?
Well, it has its own democratically elected government, an independent military, its own judicial system, a distinct currency, and it issues its own passports, which are recognized for travel worldwide.
Right.
Furthermore, it actively participates in a surprising number of international organizations, even if under specific names like Chinese Taipei for the Olympics and the WTO. Now, compare that to California or Scotland. They cannot issue their own passports that are globally recognized as standalone travel documents. They don't appoint their own ambassadors to foreign nations, and they certainly don't participate in major international bodies independently. They operate entirely within their national frameworks.
It's a night and day difference when you put it like that, Sunny. It's like comparing a fully functioning, albeit perhaps unrecognized, nation-state to a state or a subnational entity.
Absolutely. And you're seeing a growing acknowledgement of this reality from the international community. The U.S., for instance, through the Taiwan Relations Act from 1979, has long recognized the importance of Taiwan's self-defense and distinct status.
Right, the TRA.
And increasingly, major global players like the G7 nations, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the U.S., and others, are explicitly emphasizing the importance of peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait.
That phrase keeps coming up.
It does. And this focus on international peace and stability, indirectly but powerfully, challenges China's narrative that this is merely an internal affair. It signals that the world views this as a matter of global peace and security.
So what does this all mean? Why is this comparison not just flawed, but actually kind of absurd when you look at it? It seems to be trying to force a square peg into a round hole, or maybe even a circular peg into a square hole. It just doesn't fit.
It is, and it's because it fundamentally confuses a region with a country. Taiwan is not just another province of China. It possesses complete state functions and institutions.
Okay.
Think about it. It has its own independent legislative, executive, and judicial branches that operate without direction from Beijing.
Completely separate.
Right. It maintains a formidable national military of around 200,000 active personnel, separate from the PLA. It issues its own currency, the new Taiwan dollar, which floats on international markets. And it maintains official diplomatic relations with over a dozen sovereign countries, alongside extensive unofficial ties worldwide with many more. It's fully self-governing and has been for decades.
So the analogy would be like saying Estonia breaking away from the Soviet Union is similar to California wanting independence.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
The context, the histories, the very nature of their political entities are just completely different. You're comparing apples to, well, completely different type of fruit entirely.
Exactly. The context of sovereignty, historical discontinuity, and the fundamental differences in political systems is entirely different. Taiwan's sovereignty issue stems from genuine historical breaks and regime changes, like the end of Japanese colonial rule and the retreat of the ROC government to Taiwan, not an internal autonomy debate within an established state. It developed separately, forged its own distinct path, and evolved into what it is today, a vibrant democracy.
And it seems like using this analogy is Beijing's way of trying to frame the issue in a very specific, convenient domestic light to control the narrative.
You've hit on a critical point. The California or Scotland analogy is Beijing's deliberate attempt to frame the Taiwan issue as an internal matter, one that they believe no other nation should comment on or interfere with.
Right, keep out.
Exactly. This is a strategic move to obscure the increasingly complex international reality of Taiwan's status and to deter foreign intervention or even discussion. It's a narrative designed primarily for internal consumption, to reinforce the party's legitimacy and national pride, but also for external influence, aimed at controlling the global discourse around Taiwan's self-governance.
So managing perceptions.
Yes, it's about managing perceptions rather than addressing reality.
And in doing so, it seems to completely disregard one of the most fundamental aspects of any democratic society. The will of the people living in Taiwan. They just seem to be an afterthought in that narrative.
That's the most significant ethical and practical flaw, in my opinion. There's a fundamental difference in the concept of self-determination.
Okay.
Polling data from Taiwan, like the long-running surveys from National Chengxi University, consistently show that the vast majority of Taiwan's population, over 60%, overwhelmingly identifies as Taiwanese, with a very small percentage, around 3%, identifying solely as Chinese.
Wow, that's a huge majority.
It is.
Yeah.
This strong, distinct identity is a result of their own democratic processes, a unique history, and a lived experience that is entirely separate from mainland China. This isn't a regional independence movement operating within an existing constitutional framework, like Scotland's independence referendum, where the constitutional and legal path is already defined and the populace is largely integrated into the UK.
Right.
This is a people who have built their own distinct national consciousness and a thriving democratic society over decades, and they largely don't see themselves as part of the PRC.
Okay, so we've definitively established why those comparisons, Taiwan as California or Scotland, just don't work. They're built on shaky ground, ignoring history, governance, and the very real will of the people.
Pretty much.
But if you had to find a better way to look at this, something that at least gets closer to the reality, perhaps even from a mainland Chinese perspective, what would that be? Something that might reveal internal contradictions in their own policies or narratives, perhaps.
That's an excellent way to frame it, because no analogy is ever truly perfect, as Taiwan's situation is genuinely unique in international relations.
Fair enough.
However, we can certainly propose some more fitting, though still imperfect, comparisons that offer a clearer, more honest lens for understanding the situation. And interestingly, they often highlight inherent self-contradictions in Beijing's own approach to historical claims and modern sovereignty.
Lay them on us. Give us the first one. I'm ready.
Okay. Analogy number 1. Taiwan to China is like North Korea to South Korea.
Ooh, now that's a spicy one. Tell us more. That immediately raises eyebrows.
It does, doesn't it? Think about it. South Korea claims sovereignty over the entire Korean peninsula, viewing North Korea as an illegally split entity, a rogue state, if you will, that should eventually be reunited under Seoul's democratic governance.
Right.
Yet, despite that claim, North Korea has operated as a fully independent sovereign state for over 70 years. It has its own military, its own distinct government, its own foreign relations, and is even a recognized member of the United Nations, maintaining diplomatic ties with numerous countries.
So a functioning, separate state.
Exactly. This forces a fascinating and perhaps uncomfortable question for Beijing. Is China willing to concede that Taiwan is, in fact, de facto independent like North Korea? It highlights the significant gap between a historical claim or a constitutional assertion and the actual effective control and international recognition a governing entity possesses. It forces a look at the reality on the ground versus the aspirational rhetoric.
That truly makes you think about the practical reality versus the stated claim. What's the next one you've got for us?
Analogy number 2. Taiwan to China is like Outer Mongolia to the Qing Empire.
Outer Mongolia. Now that's a deep cut into history. I'm going to need you to explain that for all of us history buffs, and maybe those of us who skipped that particular chapter.
It absolutely is, and it's particularly relevant because the People's Republic of China itself recognized Outer Mongolia's independence.
Oh, they did? Okay.
Yes. Outer Mongolia declared independence in 1911, right around the time of the Xinhai Revolution that overthrew the Qing dynasty. It eventually became a Soviet satellite state and officially gained full independence after a 1945 plebiscite, where the population overwhelmingly voted for independence.
Our vote.
Exactly. Crucially, the People's Republic of China later recognized Outer Mongolia's independence. This historical precedent highlights that historical territorial claims, like those of the vast Qing dynasty, do not automatically transfer to present-day undisputed sovereignty. History is rarely a straight line, and what was once claimed by an empire doesn't necessarily remain that way, especially in the face of self-determination movements and shifting international realities. It challenges the very notion that historical ownership trumps all other factors, including the will of the people and effective governance.
That's a powerful point about historical claims not being eternal. Just because it was once part of an empire doesn't mean it inherently belongs to a successor state today. Any more thought-provoking comparisons?
Yes, analogy number 3, which isn't a sovereignty to sovereignty comparison, but it's absolutely crucial for understanding the Taiwanese perspective and their deep-seated fears. Taiwan to China is like Hong Kong's struggle to retain autonomy under one country, two systems.
Ah, Hong Kong. That's a very recent, very painful memory for many, isn't it? A cautionary tale unfolding in real time.
It absolutely is. While Hong Kong was an undeniable part of China that was returned from British colonial rule under a specific agreement, and Taiwan is not, as it was never ruled by the PRC.
Important distinction.
Very. But this analogy powerfully captures Taiwan's deep-seated distrust of Beijing's political system and its promises. For many Taiwanese, what happened in Hong Kong, particularly after the imposition of the 2020 National Security Law, is viewed not as a successful blueprint for peaceful coexistence, but as a stark precedent or a cautionary tale.
Yeah, I can see that.
They saw their fellow Chinese-speaking democratic society lose its freedoms and autonomy far faster and more comprehensively than anyone anticipated, despite the one country, two systems framework being explicitly promised.
Right, the promise wasn't kept, basically.
From their perspective, yes. It makes them see this model not as a successful path to unification, but as a dangerous one-way street to losing their own hard-won freedoms and democratic way of life, something they value above almost all else.
That makes perfect, horrifying sense. They're looking at that and saying, no, thank you. We'd like to keep our freedoms. Is there a final, equally insightful analogy for us?
Yes, analogy number 4. Taiwan is like West Germany or East Germany during the Cold War.
Now, that's a classic historical comparison, bringing us back to a fascinating period of global division. Tell us the connection.
During the Cold War, both West Germany and East Germany claimed to represent the true Germany. They were undeniably culturally and historically linked, sharing language, heritage, and a common past. Yet they functioned as two distinct sovereign states for decades, with fundamentally different political systems, ideologies, and international alliances.
Right, totally different systems.
Exactly. West Germany was a vibrant democracy, while East Germany was a communist state. Unification eventually occurred, not through military force or coercion, but through internal changes in East Germany, like the fall of the Berlin Wall and significant shifts in the broader international environment.
So driven by the people and circumstances.
Precisely. The implication here is profound. If any future unification between Taiwan and China were ever to occur, it should be driven by the genuine democratic will of the Taiwanese people, through peaceful means and without external coercion or military might. It implies a peaceful, voluntary process, if any at all, and respects the self-determination of the people involved.
So it really boils down to this. For genuine, productive international dialogue and mutual understanding, Beijing needs to use more realistic analogies and frameworks of understanding. These self-comforting ones, like California or Scotland, not only deepen misunderstandings internationally, but also perpetuate misjudgments internally, making it harder for China itself to accurately assess the situation.
Yeah.
They don't actually move the conversation forward in any meaningful way.
Exactly. They create an internal echo chamber that prevents true understanding of the complex reality of Taiwan's separate development and its people's distinct identity. It's a narrative that walls off reality.
Okay, so we've peeled back the layers of those analogies. Now let's talk about the heart of the matter, the core motivations behind this complex geopolitical dance.
Right.
Why does Taiwan so strongly resist unification with mainland China? And why is it such an incredibly central, non-negotiable goal for Beijing? What's perceived to be in it for each side? And what are the potential downsides, the very real risks for both? Let's start with Taiwan's perspective. Why is unification seen as such a significant disadvantage or even an existential disaster for them?
For Taiwan, the primary concern, the absolute bedrock of their resistance, is the loss of democracy and freedom.
That makes sense.
Taiwan has painstakingly developed a robust, vibrant democratic system since its first direct presidential elections in 1996. Its citizens now enjoy fundamental freedoms, free speech, a fiercely independent press, the right to peaceful assembly, and a multi-party political system.
Things we value highly.
Absolutely. Unification with mainland China would, without a doubt, bring Taiwan under Beijing's authoritarian system, which includes widespread censorship, strict internet controls, and severe restrictions on media, publishing, and public discourse.
So things we take for granted here, like satirical shows on YouTube, or even just critical news programs reporting on government actions, or even just sharing dissenting opinions on social media, those could just disappear overnight, or worse, become dangerous activities.
Absolutely. You could imagine how vibrant online content, critical analyses, or even casual discussions that thrive in Taiwan's open media landscape would be censored, removed, or result in severe penalties for those who produce or share them.
Wow.
Creative expression in arts and culture, which truly blossoms in Taiwan's liberal society, would be severely stifled, constrained by state narratives and ideological correctness.
And Hong Kong is the example again.
We don't have to guess about this future. We have a very recent, tangible, and frankly, heartbreaking example in Hong Kong, where we've seen a rapid and alarming erosion of democratic freedoms, judicial independence, and autonomy under Beijing's rule, especially after the 2020 national security law. That's a very real-world precedent, a chilling forecast for Taiwan.
What about their identity? Because when you visit Taiwan, the sense of being Taiwanese is incredibly palpable. It's a distinct national identity, not just a regional one. Would that be erased?
That's right. There's a strong and distinct Taiwanese identity that has solidified over decades, particularly among younger generations. Unification could lead to Taiwan being relabeled, losing that positive international recognition and respect associated with Taiwanese. Think about the potential chaos regarding Taiwanese passports, international travel, and cultural exchange. They would likely be absorbed under mainland China's identity and governance, losing their unique international standing and the ability to represent themselves independently.
So it's about more than just a name change.
Much more. This isn't just about a name. It's about recognition, autonomy, and cultural survival on the global stage. It's about who they are.
And everyday life, the fundamental values that underpin Taiwanese society. That seems like it would be a huge, almost irreconcilable clash.
A massive clash indeed. Taiwanese society deeply values free thought, open debate, respect for diversity, and principles like gender equality and LGBTQ+ rights, which are fundamental to their way of life, and progressive social norms.
Right.
These contrast sharply with Beijing's more centralized, state-controlled system, its emphasis on national unity over individual liberties, and its growing nationalist culture, sometimes referred to as Little Pink culture.
Ah, yes, the online nationalists.
Exactly. Unification would bring potential political indoctrination, social division as these two very different value systems collide, and a suppression of the very essence of Taiwanese liberal society.
Let's talk about the economy, specifically their powerhouse semiconductor industry. Taiwan is home to TSMC, a company that pretty much runs the world's advanced chip supply. What happens to that if unification occurs?
That's a critical point. Taiwan's economy, particularly its leading semiconductor industry, with giants like TSMC.
Huge company.
Immense. It's absolutely critical to the world's technological supply chain and the global economy. Unification could mean mainland China's state-controlled economic model directly interfering with Taiwan's economic autonomy, potentially absorbing its high-tech assets, talent, and intellectual property.
Oh, wow.
This could reduce Taiwan to a secondary development region, lacking true economic independence and strategic control over its most valuable industries. This isn't just about who owns what, it's about the entire operating philosophy and global leverage of their economy.
And then, of course, the worst-case scenario, the one everyone is hoping to avoid.
Yes, the military and security risk. If unification were to occur via military means, which Beijing has never ruled out—
You keep saying that.
They do. Taiwan would face a catastrophic war. We're talking about immense loss of life, unimaginable economic devastation, the complete destruction of the island's critical infrastructure, and a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions.
Just unthinkable.
It's a scenario that every Taiwanese citizen dreads, and one that would have devastating global ramifications, disrupting trade, technology, and international stability.
On the flip side, what are the perceived benefits for mainland China? Why is this such a paramount, non-negotiable goal for them? It seems like it's an incredibly high priority, almost foundational to their self-image.
Indeed it is. For mainland China, unification is fundamentally a face project, a matter of national pride and historical vindication.
Ah, face.
Yes. It would be presented domestically as the culmination of China's historic national rejuvenation, which is a central pillar of the Chinese Communist Party's legitimacy and its promise to restore China to global prominence.
Right, the CCP's narrative.
It fulfills a long-standing nationalistic goal, essentially closing the painful chapter on what they call the century of humiliation, which began in the mid-19th century. It's about restoring what they perceive as their rightful place and territorial integrity.
So it's a huge, perhaps the biggest, boost to their internal narrative and the party's credibility. It confirms their vision of a resurgent China.
Absolutely. Another significant, though perhaps ironic, benefit for China would be acquiring Taiwan's international image and democratic facade.
How so?
Well, Taiwan has a well-deserved international reputation for its vibrant freedom, technological innovation, successful democracy, and strong human rights record.
True.
Beijing might aim to leverage this by claiming peaceful unification, hoping to improve its own often criticized international image and demonstrate the success of its one country, two systems model, despite its challenges in Hong Kong. They would effectively try to absorb Taiwan's soft power.
And then there's the incredibly valuable chip industry, which we just touched on. That's not just economic, it's a massive strategic asset.
Yes, the strategic chip resources and industrial chain. Taiwan's semiconductor industry, particularly TSMC, is globally critical.
Can't overstate it.
Right. Gaining control over this would give Beijing immense leverage in the global supply chain, bolstering its military technology and economic control, especially amidst the ongoing tech rivalries and sanctions with the West. This isn't just about wealth or market share. It's about strategic control over a fundamental technology that underpins everything from smartphones to advanced military systems.
Yeah.
It's a national security imperative for them.
And geographically, Taiwan is in an incredibly important spot. It's not just a piece of land. It's a key strategic position.
It truly is. Taiwan's strategic location in the first island chain, that crucial series of archipelagos off the East Asian mainland.
Right, the island chain strategy.
Yes. China views it as a key barrier to its open ocean access and global power projection. Control over Taiwan would significantly enhance China's military reach into the Western Pacific, allowing its Navy and Air Force to operate freely beyond the first chain.
Big implications.
Huge. This directly challenges the U.S. and its allies, giving Beijing unprecedented access to the open ocean and altering the strategic balance of power in the Indo-Pacific.
So it's a huge geopolitical and military advantage, fundamentally changing the calculus in the region.
Precisely. And finally, a successful unification would provide a massive, unprecedented boost to domestic nationalism and solidify China's rising global influence and power, fulfilling a long-held dream for many within China and signaling to the world China's undisputed ascendancy.
But there are risks for China too, right, if they use force?
Oh, absolutely. It's critical to acknowledge the potential high costs of forceful unification. A military takeover, as we discussed earlier, would incur extremely high costs for China, including severe international economic sanctions from major trading partners, widespread diplomatic isolation, and significant military losses.
Devastating consequences.
Yes, this makes the calculus incredibly complex for Beijing, as the perceived benefits must be weighed against these devastating potential consequences, which could cripple their economy and set back their global ambitions by decades.
So after all that deep diving into history, politics, and economics, here's a thought for our listeners, especially those who might have grown up with a very specific narrative about Taiwan, perhaps one that has never been openly questioned or challenged. What if you're wrong? We know this next thought might be deeply uncomfortable for some, but for a true exploration, it's a question we must bravely ask ourselves.
That's a deeply uncomfortable but profoundly necessary question, isn't it? Many individuals truly and deeply believe that Taiwan has always been part of China.
Right.
And we understand that this belief is often deeply ingrained, woven into the very fabric of daily life through consistent education, state-controlled media, and even popular culture. It's a pervasive narrative.
Yep.
But it's important for everyone to ask themselves, is this belief based on verifiable history that you've independently examined, cross-referenced, and truly understood from multiple perspectives? Or is it simply what you've been taught to believe from a very young age, without the opportunity to explore alternative viewpoints, access different historical accounts, or hear dissenting voices?
Because history isn't always what we're told it is, right? There are always different perspectives, different interpretations, and sometimes inconvenient facts that get glossed over.
Exactly. And let's look at some key historical facts that might directly contradict or at least complicate that ingrained narrative.
Okay.
For instance, after Taiwan was ceded to Japan in 1895 through the Treaty of Shimonoseki, it was under Japanese colonial rule for a full 50 years.
That half century again.
Right. That's a significant period, in fact, longer than its previous direct rule under the Qing dynasty. This means for half a century, Taiwan's development, its legal system, its infrastructure, and its cultural influences were shaped by Japan, entirely separate from any Chinese governance. Then after World War II in 1945, Taiwan was received by the Republic of China, ROC, which was the nationalist government, not the People's Republic of China, PRC, which didn't even exist yet, as it was founded in 1949.
Crucial point.
Very. In fact, at its very founding, the PRC itself, in its early declarations and pronouncements, acknowledged that Taiwan doesn't belong to New China, recognizing the complex, unresolved status of the island.
So Taiwan didn't split from the PRC at some point in the last 70 years. It was never even with the PRC to begin with. It's not a secession. It's a distinct, separate trajectory.
Precisely. Taiwan's evolution has been entirely distinct and self-governing. First, Japanese colonial rule, then a period of martial law under the Republic of China government that fled to the island, followed by a remarkably robust and successful democratic transition in the 1980s and 90s.
Right, the democratization.
It didn't split from the PRC. It developed separately, forged its own path, and evolved its own unique identity, political system, and national consciousness, entirely independent of mainland China. So we have to ask some rhetorical questions for deep reflection.
Okay, if you've never truly been there yourself, if they don't use your laws, if they elect their own leaders who don't answer to your government, if they have their own military currency and culture, And if their youth consistently say, "We are not your people, we are Taiwanese," do you truly, morally, and legally have the right to claim, "That's mine," based solely on historical maps or ancient imperial claims?
That's a very blunt, very direct challenge to ingrained beliefs, Sunny. It's asking people to critically examine what they believe to be true.
It is. Because history isn't always what you imagine. Sometimes you've simply not been allowed to see the other side, the other narrative, the other set of facts.
Right.
And that's why independent verification, critical thinking, and seeking out diverse perspectives are so crucial here, especially on such a sensitive and globally significant issue.
Sunny, if we connect all this to the bigger picture, it feels like the world is reacting to this whole situation now in a much more significant, much more unified way. It's no longer just an internal issue that Beijing can discuss unilaterally, right?
No, definitely not. It feels like it's internationalizing incredibly fast.
You've observed a profound and undeniable shift. The Taiwan issue has indeed transitioned from being perceived primarily as an internal affair to becoming a major, even central international concern, especially with the escalating U.S.-China strategic competition.
Right.
It's now front and center on the global geopolitical stage, impacting trade, security, and diplomatic relations worldwide.
What are some of the key international actions or statements we're seeing that indicate this shift? Give us the headlines.
Well, you have the U.S.'s longstanding Taiwan Relations Act from 1979, which commits the U.S. to providing Taiwan with defensive capabilities, and more recently, the 6 assurances from the Reagan administration, both foundational to U.S. policy.
Okay.
Beyond that, there's growing explicit concern from key U.S. allies like Japan, Australia, and European nations about maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. You see increasingly frequent high-level visits from foreign delegations to Taiwan, despite Beijing's protests.
And I vividly remember hearing about the G7 weighing in on this. That's a big, big deal, signaling a unified front from major global economies.
It absolutely is. The significance of the 2021 G7 summit communique cannot be overstated. For the very first time, it explicitly mentioned peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait.
First time ever.
Yes. That signaled a collective international stance from some of the world's most powerful democracies against any unilateral change to the status quo by force. It's a clear, unequivocal message that this isn't just Beijing's business. It impacts global peace, economic stability, and democratic values.
So the world is watching.
It means the world is watching, and it's taking sides on the method of resolution, even if not on the ultimate political outcome.
Meanwhile, mainland China isn't sitting still. They're ramping up their pressure tactics, which almost seems to backfire in some ways by drawing even more international attention and sympathy for Taiwan. It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it?
It's a profound paradox. Beijing has significantly increased its military actions, with frequent air incursions into Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, the ADIZ.
Right, the ADIZ incursions.
And increased naval and Coast Guard activities near Taiwan's outlying islands like Kinmen. They've also enacted new legal directives, such as recently threatening the death penalty for stubborn Taiwan independence elements, and continue to apply immense diplomatic and economic pressure on countries not to engage with Taiwan, as we saw with Lithuania and its Taiwan representative office.
Yeah, that Lithuania situation.
While these actions are meant to assert control and deter international engagement, ironically, they often draw more international attention to Taiwan's autonomy and the potential for an aggressive conflict, strengthening the resolve of democratic nations to support Taiwan.
So it's unintentionally making the world pay even more attention to Taiwan as a distinct, vulnerable, but resilient entity. How is Taiwan reacting to all this? Are they just hunkering down, hoping for the best, or are they taking proactive steps?
Not at all. Taiwan is showing remarkable resilience and proactive diplomacy on multiple fronts.
Like what?
For example, they've been vigorously pushing their new southbound policy to diversify trade, investment, and cultural ties away from mainland China, building stronger relationships with Southeast Asian, South Asian, and Australian nations.
That move.
And on the defense front, they've implemented significant reforms, like extending compulsory military service for men to 1 year, and have made substantial international military purchases, including advanced F-16 fighter jets and M1A2T tanks from the U.S.
Beefing up defenses.
Exactly. This demonstrates a clear porcupine strategy and a proactive defense posture, showing their unwavering determination to defend themselves and deter any potential aggression. They're not just hoping for the best, they're actively preparing for the worst.
After this deep dive, what's the big takeaway from all of this for you, our listener? How do we summarize this complex reality?
The concise summary here is critical. The Taiwan is like California or Scotland analogy is a fundamental misrepresentation of history, international law, and current political reality.
It just doesn't fit.
Right. It's primarily a strategic narrative used by Beijing to apply domestic logic to what is, in fact, a complex international problem, and to obscure Taiwan's distinct status and self-governing reality.
So the analogy, no matter how often it's repeated, no matter how deeply it's ingrained in a particular national narrative, simply can't change the facts on the ground.
Precisely. This analogy cannot change Taiwan's factual status as a distinct political entity that has effectively governed itself for over 7 decades, nor can it dismiss the overwhelming will of the Taiwanese people for self-determination and their continued democratic way of life. They have their own vibrant democracy, their own military, their own currency, and their own distinct identity, all entirely independent of Beijing.
What's the short-term outlook here? More of the same, just perhaps intensified.
In the short term, Beijing will likely continue its military deterrence, diplomatic isolation tactics, and economic pressure. However, this may paradoxically continue to increase international support for Taiwan, as we've already seen with the G7 statements, and increased engagement from democratic nations.
So, potentially counterproductive for them?
It's a strategy that seems to be backfiring on the global stage.
And the long term? Does the situation just persist indefinitely, this delicate dance around the Taiwan Strait?
In the long term, as Taiwanese identity continues to solidify and diverge further from mainland China, and as the international landscape shifts with increasing great power competition, the Taiwan issue is likely to become even more internationalized. It's already emerging as a core issue in U.S.-China relations, and that trajectory is likely to continue, making it a flashpoint for global stability. The ongoing challenge for Taiwan, for Beijing, and for the entire international community will be finding a delicate balance between maintaining the status quo, respecting the will of the people, and crucially, avoiding conflict that could have catastrophic global consequences.
And perhaps if you, our listener, have never been allowed to freely access different opinions, different historical accounts, or hear dissenting voices, what you believe might not be an unwavering faith, but rather simply a limitation imposed by your informational environment.
And maybe, just maybe, it's not that Taiwanese want to split, but that they've simply never joined the common entity you imagine. And perhaps it's not that China must unify, but rather that without Taiwan, a significant portion of your national narrative and historical vindication might crumble, forcing a difficult reconsideration of a century of national identity building.
This is Sip and Talk. What we say isn't necessarily what you want here, but it's definitely something we've researched, analyzed, and discussed before saying it.
We try our best.
Of course, like any humans, we might research wrong, speak wrong, or misunderstand, and we always, always welcome your corrections and insights. That's how we all learn, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for tuning in today, for joining us on this really deep dive, and especially for sending in those incredibly thought-provoking questions. They truly make these conversations what they are, pushing us to explore beyond the surface.
Don't forget to subscribe to the Sip and Talk podcast wherever you get your shows. Give us a follow, drop a review. It really helps us keep these conversations going.
Please do.
And before we sign off, a quick shout out to our old pal, our fantastic friend, Micky. You absolutely got to check out his YouTube channel, Micky to Life.
Oh yeah, Micky.
He's got everything from fun memes to great music, delightful wine tasting experiences, and some seriously amazing travel vlogs. He's always up to something good, trust me. He's a legend.
He really is. Good stuff over there.
Let's work together.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's build something great. Sip and talk out.